And I think it's a shame that a lot of people don't take advantage of the freedom and creativity you can get in some of these areas and just always do like the popular or like normal routes that people hike. What's up everybody? We're going to be talking about backpacking trip planning today, and by we, I mean I'm going to be talking about it and you're going to be listening to everything I say. This is a topic that a lot of people have requested I cover, and rather than do a video on like all aspects of backpacking trip planning, because there are a lot of them, I thought I would just kind of break it down into 3 myths or lies or whatever you want to call them that I think a lot of people believe when they first start trying to plan their backpacking trips. And the truth is, it's a pretty complicated subject, so I totally get why people think some of these things are true when they're actually not. So with that said, let's get right into it. Actually, no, first, this video is sponsored by... It's not actually sponsored by anyone, but I do just want to take a second and say I started a Patreon. So if you want to give me your hard-earned money for some crazy reason like that, please check out the link in the description, patreon.com/KyleHatesHiking. All right, let's actually do what we're supposed to do here and talk about some of these backpacking trip planning myths. Myth number 1, are you ready for it? Or did I say lies in the title? I think I said lies instead of myths. Let me check. Yeah, it's lies. All right, so lie number 1 is that you need a GPS or like fancy trip planning software in order to plan a backpacking trip. It's not really a lie, but it is something that I think a lot of people get confused about when they first try to plan their backpacking trips and stuff. You don't need a GPS to plan anything. You don't need to use CalTopo or any of these fancy GPS planning, route planning software. That stuff is great, don't get me wrong, and as you get more experience with backpacking and planning trips, you're probably gonna wanna start using it, but you don't need it to start out at all, because the truth is that stuff can be very, very intimidating, expensive, and just an overall barrier to first starting to plan your trips. So how do you plan your trips then if you don't have all these like GPS devices and software and all this stuff? It's easy. You use what's on the wall right there, and right there, and right there. A map, a paper map, or a plastic map, whatever the hell freaking material is. And the way I like to use the map to plan my trips is to essentially decide how many days I'm gonna be out for, how many miles I want to do per day, and then what trail systems are available in the area I want to hike, right? So let's say, for instance, I'm gonna do like a weekend hike in the White Mountains, and I don't wanna push it too much. Maybe I just wanna do like 10 to 12 miles a day, something like that. Now you could definitely plan a trip like this on CalTopo, for instance, or any other GPS software, and it'd be totally fine. And like I said a second ago, maybe you do want to explore this idea. I'm not saying that GPSs and this software is useless or anything like that. It's certainly awesome stuff. You just shouldn't be intimidated by it. It's definitely not a requirement to start. Like, you don't have to learn this really, really complicated piece of software just to start planning your own backpacking trip. So back to the White Mountains. What I would do is I would take the map, and now that I know how many miles a day I want to do and I know how many days I'm going to be out for, I would just literally try to visualize a trip. Just look at the map, choose your starting point, and just be like, okay, do I want to do a loop? Do I want to end at a different trailhead and hitchhike or get a shuttle back to my car? And then you just try to plan a route just based on the trails. Don't worry about mileage at first, just look at the map. Be like, okay, if I start here, I can roughly do a loop that looks like this. And then once you have a rough idea there, you go through and you actually add up the mileage each day. You gotta find some areas where you can camp, and then you try to just like piece together a trip like that. No GPS is necessary, no software necessary. Just do it the good old-fashioned way with a map in your own 2 freaking eyes. Line number 2 is that you have to do a backpacking trip, or you have to choose a route that's already been done by somebody else, or is like a popular, well-known like loop or route or something like that. It seems to me like a lot of the time these days when people choose their hikes, even just day hikes, not necessarily even backpacking trips, they do it based off of like an article they read that outlines the exact trip that they're gonna go on, or maybe they saw like a route on an app like All Trails or something like that a lot of other people have already done, and then they just decide they're gonna do that preset route already because maybe it's easier to plan like that. I don't know. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do a loop or a route that someone else has done. Like, that's totally fine. All I'm saying is don't restrict yourself to only going to like popular areas or only backpacking routes that other people have done. Now let me give you an example because I did a shit job explaining that. Let's go back to the White Mountains, for instance. There's this loop called the Pemi Loop, which many of you have probably heard of. I'm sure a lot of you have probably hiked it yourself. It's basically just a really popular loop that's like a little bit over 30 miles, I think. It goes over some really famous mountains like the Bonds and Garfield and Franconia Ridge, a bunch of just like really popular stuff. And it's a great loop. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing loop. I've done it before. However, what I'm saying here is maybe instead of just like confining yourself to the Pemi loop, if you were planning a hike in that area, for instance, maybe you look at some of the other trails in the area and make like your own little custom special route. Like maybe you do a part of the Pemi loop and then you branch off and go into the middle of the wilderness there. What's it called? Over by Owl's Head, I don't remember the name of it, but you just choose a different route. You kind of customize the route to suit whatever your needs are. The benefit here is you're probably gonna see less people on certain parts of your hike. You're gonna experience some trails and areas and mountains that maybe most people don't get to because they're just confining themselves to the Pemi loop or whatever the popular loop or route or whatever is. I feel like I'm doing such a bad job of explaining this. Am I making sense? Leave a comment and tell me I'm making sense because I feel like I'm going crazy here. The truth is there's so much out there in a lot of these different areas, and I just feel like sometimes people just focus in on the really popular and well-known areas, and as a result they kind of neglect some of the lesser known but still like really cool areas. And I think a good way to like force yourself to branch out is to just don't be so restricted by routes that other people have already set, routes that are really famous. Just try to get creative and, you know, make your own routes. That's something I absolutely love doing when I'm hiking in areas like the White Mountains or the Adirondacks or any trail system where there's just like a ton of different trails all over the place. It just gives you so much freedom to just plan however you want. You can plan big days, you can plan small days, you can plan to see like so much different stuff. And I think it's a shame that a lot of people don't take advantage of the freedom and creativity you can get in some of these areas and just always do like the popular or like normal routes that people hike. Lie number 3, and this one is either gonna surprise you or not surprise you at all depending on what kind of person you are. This lie is that you need to have a daily itinerary with like every little thing planned out. If you're the kind of person that just flies by the seat of their pants, then this probably isn't gonna surprise you. You're like, why would I plan out everything like down to like my water sources and where I'm gonna go to the bathroom and all this stuff? That would probably seem a little bit excessive and unnatural to you. But on the flip side, if you're the kind of person that likes to plan everything, then this is definitely gonna be a mistake that you might make when you first start out. And the reason I know this is because I am very much a planner in my life. I like to plan everything basically. And as a result, when I first started planning backpacking trips, I would plan way too much stuff. Now, obviously you have to plan some, like you can't just show up like at a trailhead and just expect to have a trip that goes well, but there's a balance, right? You have to plan enough that you're safe and that you can allow yourself to have a good trip, but if you over plan, you're either gonna end up restricting yourself and maybe missing some things that you could have otherwise seen, or having a bad experience because like you forced yourself to go to one spot when maybe, you know, when you were actually out there, you decided to change your plan, but you couldn't bring yourself to do it because you're too much of a planner. And so you really got to find a balance between planning too much and not planning enough. So what exactly is too much planning? Because that's an important question, and it's really going to depend person to person. But just for me personally, I like to plan the rough amount of miles per day I'm going to do, a rough campsite for each day, like a general area where I know I'm going to camp. And of course, you have to plan how much food you're gonna need. And I guess you also need to make sure there's adequate water in your areas and stuff, but I don't plan like down to every last detail, right? Like I've seen some people that will plan their lunch break for each day. They're gonna plan every single water source, like every single spot they're gonna stop, just like all this stuff. And I just feel like that can really kind of limit your experience sometimes, because very often when you're hiking, things don't go according to plan, and not even in a bad way. Maybe you just are feeling good and maybe you want to hike a little bit further on your second day, for instance, but you planned on stopping after only 12 miles, but you want to keep going, you want to do 14 or whatever. If you're too stuck in your plan, you might force yourself to stop early, even though you know you kind of want to keep going, right? So it's just important to know that while you're out there, you can change your plans according to how you're feeling and how your trip's going. And to give another example, when it comes to through hiking, when I was on the Appalachian Trail, basically the only thing I would plan would be how many days I was going to go between towns, and thus how much food I was gonna need to go between towns. So if I knew I had a 3-day stretch from resupply to resupply, I would grab 3 days worth of food, but I wouldn't like look over the map and guidebook and plan out my campsite for each night. I would just know that when I start the section, I have to get out of the section. I have to be done that section in the next town within 3 days. And then I would just decide my campsites based off of how I was feeling when I was actually out there. Maybe the first day I'm feeling good, I want to do a little bit extra. The second day, I'm feeling good, I want to do a little bit extra. And then that third day, well, guess what? Now I get to go into town like a half day early or even a couple hours early. The truth is, trip planning is a really, really complicated subject. So if you have more questions, which I'm sure you do after this video, please leave them in the comments. I would love to make another video on this subject, or maybe just a video where I go through like all of my trip planning procedures. That might be a lot for one video, but I could try. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you like this video, please double check. And also one more plug for the Patreon. It's brand new. Go check it out. If you watch these videos on the regular, then maybe buy me a beer, you know? Because that's essentially what you're doing. Thank you guys so much. Have a good day.